Pizza time.
What?
Pizza time.
Ever since December of last year, the comment I've been seeing in my comment sections more than anything else is this: do a video on Into the Spiderverse. Right now, you lazy piece of shit. And every time I saw this comment, it always left me quite confused because I had never seen Into the Spiderverse. I mean, it's an animated movie by Sony. Why would I make a video on it? Why would you want me to make a video on it? But after actually seeing it last night, I do finally understand why. Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse is not only among the most remarkable animated movies Sony has ever done, it's also among the most remarkable Spider-Man movies Sony has ever done, right up there besides Spider-Man 2. And as to why this is, there are many reasons. It's narratively very bold, it's visually incredible, and so on. But for me, the one core thing that makes this film so remarkable is a bit different. This one core thing is very small and inconspicuous, to the point where it's very easy to miss unless you're specifically looking for it. But at the same time, it's also very significant and powerful, to the point where it serves as the very backbone that this entire movie is built around. So what is this mysterious one core storytelling thing? It's the movie's highly consistent and varied and effective use of reversals. In case the term reversal isn't familiar to everyone here, essentially it's like this. In storytelling, a reversal means the method of setting up an assumption and then paying that assumption off with a reality that's entirely opposite, as in a reversal. Again, there are multiple different aspects about Into the Spiderverse that are worthy of doing a video on, but today I want to focus on its utilization of reversals, because honestly, this film does utilize reversals more expertly and frequently than any other film I've seen in a while, in a way that there's some form of a reversal in pretty much every scene. And so, let's take a closer look at Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse and try to understand its magical use of reversals, in what different ways it uses them, and what it achieves by using them. Let's see how this movie set up the assumption of being just another Sony animated movie and then turn that assumption upside down by actually being one of the best animated and Spider-Man movies of all time. The most common reason why big ensemble movies like Into the Spider-Verse often don't work so well is because there are too many characters and not enough time to properly develop them. Infinity War worked because Marvel had spent like 20 movies to build and develop its characters, plus it was 2.5 hours long. Spider-Verse has neither of those. It has no earlier movies for these characters, it's way under 2 hours long. The movie does properly develop some of its characters, especially Miles Morales and the old Peter Parker. And in some ways, the other Spider-People and Spider-Pig do get development as well. But the one set of characters that pretty much get no development at all are the villains. No considerable amount of time is spent to build them up. No considerable amount of time is spent to develop them. And by logic, this should then be the case of yet another bunch of forgettable comic book movie villains. Yet somehow, it isn't so. Somehow, this movie has as fantastic and memorable villains as any other Spider-Man movie. And that begs the question, how is that possible? How can this movie have memorable villains when it has no time to properly develop them into being memorable? Yeah, that's how. Take this Olivia villain character for example. The way she's introduced, she doesn't seem to be anyone worth any attention whatsoever. Just some harmless nerdy science person. Overall, it's clear that she's nobody we have to worry about. And then...
And I, for one, can't wait to watch.
What did you say your name was?
Call me Doc Ock.
Even though this movie has a few different great memorable villains, I would argue that this female Doc Ock is the most memorable of them all. Not because she gets more development than the other villains. In fact, she gets less development than the other villains. She gets absolutely no development at all. We don't know why she is who she is. We don't know why she does what she does. But that doesn't matter because she is introduced with such a powerful reversal. First, the movie creates an assumption of her being a harmless nobody, and then it suddenly reveals her to actually be the exact opposite. Same with Kingpin. Unlike Doc Ock, he does get some level of character development, where it turns out he's causing all this mayhem just because he wants his family back. That is development, but alone it's not very original or super effective. But the way the movie makes it super effective is by way of a super effective reversal. When Kingpin is introduced, he's this gigantic human incarnation of confidence and remorselessness and destruction. But then it turns out he's just a sad little man who misses his wife and son. Again, an assumption that's at one end of the spectrum and then a reality that's at the opposite end. Same with Miles' uncle, who is revealed to be the masked killer working for Kingpin. Now, you could say that this reveal isn't so great because it's such an obvious one, and that's fair. But still, I would argue that the reveal is highly effective, not because it's surprising, but because it's such an extreme reversal. Throughout the movie, Miles views his uncle as someone he can always rely on. But then it turns out his uncle is that one person who's been trying to kill him this whole time. And that highly steep gap between assumption and reality is what makes this reveal such a powerful character moment. To be clear, I'm not advocating tossing out character development in favor of reversals. No matter what kind of movie you're making, you should always properly develop your characters. But that said, if you want your characters to make a quick, lasting impression on the audience, give them some form of a reversal, just like this movie did with Peter B. Parker. When we think of Peter Parker and Spider-Man, we always think of this unyielding fighter who never gives up. And now we suddenly meet a Peter Parker who gave up a long time ago, which is why he's a character you won't forget. Because there's a clear assumption of who he is, and then in reality he turns out to be the exact opposite.
6 shares. Don't forget the guy who planned the job.
He thinks he can sit it out and still take a slice. I know why they call him the Joker.
What do you believe in, huh? What do you believe in?
I believe whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger.
If you look back to the age of Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and the overall golden age of visual comedy, you might notice one permanent comedy factor. No matter how different the jokes may be, they are pretty much always based on the same formula: assumption and reality. As in, first the joke set up an expectation of something happening, and then they pay it off with a reality of the opposite happening. Still today, we have filmmakers like Edgar Wright and Wes Anderson who are doing their best to keep visual comedy alive. But for the most part, it has withered down to near extinction in favor of dialogue-based comedy. You know, because dialogue is much easier than visual stuff. I'm not saying you can't enjoy dialogue-based comedy. I'm just saying that visual comedy, at least to me, will always be superior, which is why I always try to support it. Take 2013's The Lone Ranger, for example. I understand why this movie didn't make bank at the box office, but at the same time, I do have a lot of respect for the way it pays tribute to the visual reversal comedy made famous by the likes of Keaton and Chaplin.
The United States Army. Finally, someone who will listen to reason. It's very helpful, thank you. Oh. What is it? Believe me, where this train's headed, there's no place for men who do.
Oh, yeah? Where's that?
The future.
Getting to Into the Spiderverse, I'm sure you can already put together what I'm going to say. This movie is one of the funniest movies I've seen in a long time, and I would argue this is so because of its excellent use of this visual reversal comedy of setting up an expectation and then turning that expectation upside down. For example, take this scene where Miles gets bit by a radioactive spider. For 2 long minutes we've been watching this ominous spider creeping around, getting closer and closer to Miles. The whole time we're biting our nails in anxiety because it's very clear that the spider is going to bite him in some terrible, shocking way. That's our assumption, our expectation. So if you know that expectation, how can you make a joke out of it?
Miles, let's go.
Another example. In the beginning of the movie, Miles gets advice that the best way to get a girl is to just confidently place a hand on their shoulder and then be like, hey. Later on, Miles is about to test this out with Gwen Stacy. And again, our expectation is that she's gonna react not so well and that it's gonna be this big super awkward Larry David situation. But no, that's not the joke. Gwen doesn't react in any negative way. She's just like, okay, see you around. That's the joke, or at least part of the joke, because after that we do get the big super awkward Larry David situation joke we were waiting for, when Miles gets stuck in her hair. We knew the awkward joke was coming, but we didn't expect it to come this way, and that's what makes it funny. Once again, I'm not saying dialogue-based comedy can't be funny. It can be funny. There's a bunch of funny dialogue comedy in this movie. But even then, you might notice that most likely it's always based on the reversal of expectation and reality. Like this joke, where we assume that Miles is done talking with his dad, but then his dad suddenly stops him and embarrasses him in front of everyone else, in a way we didn't expect. If you want your audience to truly laugh, anticipate their expectations and then give them a payoff, that's the opposite. If you have a cafeteria full of harmless looking scientists, have those scientists pull out a crap ton of guns, like it was a Schwarzenegger movie. If you have your heroes finally preparing to chase their ultimate goal, cut to them eating hamburgers. If you have a tiny rundown shack serving as the base of your heroes' operations, make that tiny rundown shack the Spider-Man equivalent of the Batcave. Anything you do, do it in a way the audience doesn't expect. And maybe also, if you want it to be really effective, just figure out a way to do it visually.
Believe me, where this train's headed, there's no place for men who do.
Oh, yeah? Where's that?
The future.
I don't think so, counselor, because right now, my guys are right outside this train and they will open the door behind you and then you will look like a fool.
As an argument, I would say that the greatest movies of all time are always emotional roller coasters. A great drama also makes you laugh. A great comedy also makes you cry. A great horror thriller also gives you moments of levity. It doesn't matter what emotions a movie makes you feel. What matters is the size of the spaces between the emotions that a movie makes you feel. And the single most effective way to create these spaces and make the audience go from one emotion to another is by utilizing reversals. Truthfully, there are multiple different bigger and smaller ways of using reversals with emotions. But for this video, I'm gonna focus on these reversals on more of a scene/sequence level. If you want your scene to be powerful and memorable and overall great, you should always build it on a reversal. As in, you enter your scene one way and then you end it in an entirely other way. For example, let's look back to my previous video and the ending battle scene of Captain America: Civil War. When the scene begins, Tony Stark and Steve Rogers have united and are friends once again. But when the scene ends, they are bigger enemies than ever before. In other words, in this one single scene, we go from highly positive to highly negative. And that space in between, that's what makes this one of the best scenes/sequences in the MCU. As to Into the Spiderverse, I would indeed call this movie an emotional roller coaster. The biggest emotional roller coaster I've seen since Mission Impossible Fallout. And that's because it pulls off scene reversals very well. In fact, it does it so well that you could pick any scene at random and odds are that it features some form of an emotional reversal. Take this sequence at the end of Act 1, where the original Spider-Man is trying to destroy the particle accelerator. He does get beat up by some intimidating villains, but overall, the whole thing does stay fairly positive and optimistic. I mean, it's Spider-Man, he's cracking jokes throughout the whole thing. He's gonna be fine, at least up until the point where he dies. Oh. Now, you could argue that the sequence is powerful because Peter Parker dies, and that's true, but as a counter-argument, I would say that it wouldn't be nearly as powerful without the reversal. If the whole sequence had been bleak and hopeless throughout, it would have evoked just one emotion, not a range of emotions. But because it finds a natural way of going from one extreme to another, from optimistic to pessimistic, it does evoke a range of emotions. But instead of me picking and choosing new scenes for this point, let's look at some of the scenes we used as examples in earlier points and see if they do all have some level of an emotional reversal.
Okay, a little bit of a gut, perhaps from dimensional warping.
Oh, yeah. Everything is fine!
Miles, let's go.
Give me that.
One more highly important thing to keep in mind. Even though your scenes and sequences should consist of different emotions, you have to be careful not to go overboard with it. Any emotional transition you make, it has to feel natural and organic, because otherwise you might end up like my boy George. But all that said, if you want to build an emotional roller coaster like Into the Spiderverse, be sure to fill it with emotional reversals. Plus combine that with character reversals as well as comedic reversals, and boy, you got yourself one hell of a movie.
In a space of about 90 seconds, you go from lamenting the death of, a hero, to escape, to slightly comedic with Jar Jar, to Anakin returning with his little kind of hag.
I may have gone too far in a few places.